Number 10. The Case of Zoe Campos. Carlos Rodriguez met Zoe Campos on November 17, 2013. He invited the young girl back to his house, and when she arrived, she followed him to his bedroom. One thing led to another, and afterwards, Carlos and Zoe hung out and smoked synthetic marijuana. And that was when things went very wrong for Zoe. Carlos claimed that he was losing track of time from the weed, spacing out, and hallucinating. He thought Zoe was a demon. And so, in a state of drug-induced paranoia, he strangled her from behind and killed her. Carlos admitted all of this in a letter after he was busted for the killing 5 years after it had taken place. Her death was in 2013, but Zoe's skeletal remains weren't discovered until November of 2018, buried in a backyard. For all those years, Carlos believed he had gotten away with the crime. The investigation in 2013 was a total disaster. The police were able to confirm Zoe's last known location at Carlos's house. They even brought in cadaver dogs, who caught the smell of a corpse and followed it all through Carlos's home, into the backyard, and out to the alley. But they couldn't actually find the body, and so for 5 years, Carlos was a free man. But Carlos made a major mistake. He had told somebody what he had done, and where he had buried the body, in a very specific location in the backyard that the police had missed. This person then told the police, who returned to the scene and finally found the corpse. Only then were they able to make the arrest and charge Carlos with the murder. Number 9. 50 years on the run. Frank Freshwater escaped from a prison camp in 1959, was briefly apprehended by authorities in West Virginia in 1975, and then disappeared again. He managed to stay on the run, excluding his brief imprisonment in West Virginia for over 50 years. He thought he had gotten away with it too, until in 2015 when he was captured and locked away for good. Police discovered him living under a fake name in Florida, where he had been residing for the past 2 decades. Amazingly, officials in Brevard County had actually come up with a ruse to capture Frank, getting him to sign papers and hand over his fingerprints so they could properly ID him. U.S. Marshals in Florida figured out where Frank was hiding. They surveilled his home for a week, then approached him with an old photo as he left his trailer in rural Melbourne. At first, he lied and said he'd never seen the person in the photo, but then gave up and admitted that, yeah, they got him. Back in 1957, Frank was convicted of manslaughter. He ran somebody over with his vehicle and was given 20 years. He was imprisoned at the Ohio State Reformatory, then moved to a low-security camp near Sandusky, and that was where he made his bold escape. But now, he's back behind bars. Number 8. Backyard Burial. In South Carolina, the Edgefield County Police received a call early in the morning on May 7, 2022. There was a man lying unresponsive in his backyard. The police arrived to discover the homeowner, 60-year-old Joseph Anthony McKinnon, lying dead in the dirt. He appeared to have suffered a heart attack while digging a hole. Police were a little confused because the pit Joseph had been digging looked an awful lot like a shallow grave. And that was when they discovered the second body. Putting the clues together, the police were able to figure out what happened pretty easily. Joseph had strangled his girlfriend, 65-year-old Patricia Dent, and then started digging a grave in his backyard to hide her in. He wrapped his dead girlfriend in trash bags, had the pit nice and deep for the body, and then had a heart attack. Just when he thought he was going to get away with murder, he himself dropped dead before he could even finish covering the hole. It was one of the most extreme cases of instant karma that anyone's ever seen. Number 7. Doc Antle. Doc Antle, real name Bhagavan Antle, became hugely famous when the Tiger King show aired on Netflix during the pandemic. People had differing opinions of the guy, but it was generally agreed upon that he was up to no good. And as it turned out, he was deep into some seriously illegal business. In June of 2022, Doc Antle was charged with laundering money. The cash came from an illegal smuggling operation to bring human beings across the Mexican border and into the U.S. During a federal court hearing in Florence, Doc Antle and Andrew Sawyer, one of his employees at the Myrtle Beach Safari, were brought up on the charges. After 2 seasons of Tiger King, Doc Antle undoubtedly thought he had gotten away with all his money laundering. He must have been a bit nervous when the documentary teams came knocking on his door, but he thought there was no way the police would catch him. But after the documentary aired, he found himself in hot water. He was indicted in Virginia in 2020 on charges of wildlife trafficking and animal cruelty. And now, 2 years later, he's been busted inflating tourist numbers at his wildlife preserve to conceal cash earned through human trafficking. Number 6. The Bad Teacher. A Pennsylvania course teacher really believed that she had gotten away with an extremely inappropriate relationship with one of her students. Her name is Olivia Orts, a former teacher at Willington Area High School. And in May of 2022, she was arrested and charged with unlawful contact with a minor, along with a handful of other felonies, all pertaining to a relationship with a student. According to the New Willington Police Department, they got involved with the case in mid-April, after they were contacted by the principal of the school. The principal had been contacted by Olivia's husband, who was the one who unraveled the whole thing. You see, Olivia had been having an affair with one of her female students. She thought she could have a husband, a job, and a secret relationship, but it was just too much work. Her husband arrived from a school trip to Florida and discovered evidence of the relationship on Olivia's iPad. When the student was questioned by the police, she admitted to spending the night at Olivia's home whenever her husband would go out of town. Even after Olivia got busted, she had gone back to the house to console her now-fired teacher. The pair thought they were being clever by using Spotify to message each other, instead of the usual social media apps. But the police found those messages. Olivia was locked up, and she could be looking at jail time for her secret student affair. Number 5. Murder by cinnamon roll. A man in Germany has claimed that he only wanted to temporarily knock his wife unconscious. Despite his excuses, the court found him guilty of attempted murder. All this went down when the man's wife and mother were rushed to the hospital after eating a poisoned cinnamon roll. The 39-year-old Bavarian man worked as an IT technician in the city of Erlangen. He admitted to the police that he mixed sleeping pills into a homemade cinnamon roll and then served it to his estranged wife. He claimed to have done it so he could secretly have a longer visit with his son. Because the pair were separated, the father didn't get to spend as much time with his kid as he wanted. He thought he could just put his wife to sleep, hang out with his kid, and she would wake up thinking she had taken a nap. In his mind, he had already gotten away with it. But according to the toxicology report, the drugs in the cinnamon roll were lethal. The only reason his estranged wife survived was because she ate only half of the cinnamon roll. The other part was eaten by her mother. In 2021, the man was sentenced to 6 years in jail. Number 4. The murder of Diane DAHN. Diane DAHN was discovered dead in her apartment in 1988. That same day, Mark Bayer, her toddler of only 2 years old, was found wandering around their apartment complex. When Diane didn't show up to work at the San Diego Transit Corporation, one of her colleagues went to her home. That was when he found her lost child, and Diane's body filled with stab wounds. For 34 years, the case was open. The case grew cold, and the killer went free for over 3 decades. Things didn't really start coming together until 2000. That was when fingernail scrapings from Diane were added to the police database. Then in 2010, they used new technology to test a hair recovered from the crime scene. This allowed them to create a profile. And in 2020, police launched a genetic genealogy investigation. 34 years after the fact, the cold case unit identified Warren Robertson as the killer. Warren had lived in the same apartment complex as Diane, yet they were not known to have any connection. His name never came up in any of the initial reports, and police had no evidence that the two had ever even interacted. And unfortunately, we're probably never going to get a motive because Warren Robertson is already dead. Before the police could bring him into justice, he died in a house fire. Number 3. Bobby Love. Cheryl Love was married to her husband Bobby for 40 years in 2015, and so she was pretty confused when the police knocked on her front door in Brooklyn, rushed into her house, and surrounded Bobby in his bed where he slept. The cops asked what his name was. He replied, Bobby Love. And then they asked what his real name was, and he replied, Walter Miller. Bobby and Cheryl may have been married for 40 years, but before that, in 1977, he escaped from prison where he was supposed to serve 30 years for armed robbery. The actual robbery took place on June 21, 1971, but it was botched. Walter, now Bobby, took a bullet to his rear end, and he was sent to prison. He managed to escape by hiding civilian clothes underneath his prison uniform, slipping away from a worksite at a minimum security prison during work duty, and then getting on a bus to Manhattan. He got a new name, met his wife in the 1980s, got married in 1985, and had 4 children. He was on the run for so long that he never imagined he would get caught. But in the end, his past caught up to him. He was arrested in 2015, shipped back to North Carolina, and then released after serving just 1 year. At 69 years old, he was allowed to get back to the life he'd made for himself, and he only had to do 1 year to pay for all that running. Number 2. Secret apartment. Michael Townsend really thought he could live inside a secret apartment in a shopping center without paying rent for as long as he wanted. As unbelievable as it sounds, Michael and a group of his friends were occupying a massive underground space in Providence Place, Rhode Island. They moved in 2003 and lived there for 4 years without anyone being the wiser. Michael thought he had such a good scheme going that he had turned the secret apartment into his own personal palace, never expecting that he'd be found out. The whole thing started in 1999. Michael used to jog past the Providence shopping mall every day. During his jogs, he noticed the place was oddly empty, and so, after his home in the Mill District was destroyed by developers and he was forced out, he went to investigate the mall. That same area he had noticed during his jogs was still untouched and hidden. It was kind of an empty hole in the structure, filled with debris and leftover trash from the construction. He cleaned out leftover materials, snuck things in and out of the mall in his backpack, and did a reverse jailbreak. Michael actually snuck enough cinder blocks into the hidden section of the mall that he was able to build a wall and install a utility door to keep the apartment hidden. Michael had plans to finish a kitchen, to install wood flooring, and even to install a second bedroom. He really thought he could live inside the mall forever. But all that came crashing down in 2007 when security guards busted him by accident and had him arrested. He narrowly escaped jail and was given probation for squatting on private property. Number 1. Marise Chiverella. On March 18, 1964, Marise Chiverella left her house to go to school. She was 9 years old, living in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. The last time she was seen alive was at about 8 o'clock in the morning. Shortly after 1 o'clock that afternoon, her body was discovered in a coal refuse pit. She had been assaulted, killed, and dumped in a hole with her belongings. For 58 years, her case went unsolved. It was only in 2021 that police used DNA and genealogy to track down her killer, and it was all thanks to DNA found on her jacket. The cops used the state's DNA lab to develop a DNA profile using that very fluid that was left on the jacket. They did this back in 2007, but the DNA never turned up any matches. Every single month after, the police rechecked the database to see if they could get a hit. And in 2019, they got a hit on an extremely distant relative of the killer. So distant, the police believed it to be a 6th cousin. But it worked and brought them to James Paul Fort. He would have been 22 years old at the time of the crime. And even though he technically got away with it, since he died of a heart attack in 1980, his name certainly didn't. In late 2021, the police exhumed his corpse, and in early 2022, confirmed the DNA as a match. Even though James Fort got away with murder, his descendants all now have to live with the fact that they're related to a ruthless killer. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get caught for something you did right away or live life on the run and pay for your crime later? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.